Welcome to my live demo and art show today. I invited everybody to show up and just be part of my studio a little bit and see and witness a little bit of my process. I have a sale on right now, small art and print sale that is going on till Monday night, November 23rd, and there's 30% off on the small art that's behind me. That's part of my Good Parts of Life series and prints. And then there's some scarves and pillows that are also part of that. So as I wait for people to show up, I'll talk a little bit about what we're going to do today. I'm going to first go through a demo of a small piece and do a photo transfer process. So this is part of my work, especially when it comes to text and vintage ads, that kind of thing. I do an actual photo transfer onto the surfaces. So I thought I would show that a little bit because it's a great way to make a gift if you want to make a small piece for somebody. And so it's a real DIY kind of process. And I'll show a little bit about materials and how I go through that. I work with vintage materials like vintage wallpapers, postcards, that kind of thing. And then I work with tissue paper, and then I do a photo transfer. So there's several different steps to it, and I'll go through that. Once I finish that, then I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the pieces that are in the show and the process and the materials and the messaging, kind of why I like them. And then I'll show some of the scarves that are inspired by my work. My work is the basis of this work. So these scarves are on sale as well as pillow covers, which are great. So as you can see, a soft velour plush pillow cover. So I have several of those that are for sale. So that is all part of the sale that's on till Monday night. So as I work through this, I will talk to you about the materials that you should get in order to do this process. And then we'll move through there. Okay, so let's get started. We'll put on their fancy apron so I don't get the stuff all over the scarf that I'm wearing and other things. And what I'll talk about is some basic kind of materials, which you can get pretty easily at different places, and make something. With lockdown and that kind of thing happening in the Toronto area, this might be kind of the only solution for gift making. So when I create my work, I usually work with boards. And so you can see boards, just simple boards, but you can do this on paper or on canvas. You can just a little bit of a heavier stock paper. And I always start with creating the first layer as a setting, so to speak. So the story behind the image. And I'll go through a little bit about the process, about the materials I work. So this is with vintage wallpapers and board. But then when I try and create a story, I work with different materials that represent that story. So what does that mean? I work with old photos. So this can be kind of the center point of the work. I work with vintage postcards. The written pieces are great. This is an old vintage hotel card. So I collect these as I travel, which I haven't done a lot of this year, but part of the process of my work is trying to find materials. Or I'll work with book pages. This is from a Harlequin romance novel. Music is great. So you can find music notes there, or you can use just the actual music itself, right? And the music can be, if you're doing something about some particular person that you want to honor and show what that person's about, you can find this music actually online and print it out, and then that would be part of the story. So your first layer would be a way of setting the context for the story of that person, right? So when I first create the first layer, I work with a modeling paste. And modeling paste is quite heavy. Some people work with glue and that kind of thing, but I like it because it sets the paper right onto the surface. So I work with modeling paste, layer it on, flatten it out, that kind of thing. Then once that's done and it's dry, I'll work with tissue paper. And the tissue paper creates an abstraction and a layering and gives kind of a color palette to it. So I'll show you a final result, and you can see that's where we're going to go to. And tissue paper, this type of paper you can find from the dollar store, right? It's just gift wrap paper that you can find. But you can also use clear through paper like fabric patterns, right? Because that is a tissue paper as well. And it gives a little bit more, you can give a story about someone. If you're doing something about your mom or something that they like to sew, then you set that symbolism up that way. I also work with gift wrap paper that you can find and cut out pieces and do collage of that as a surface as well. And then the other pieces that I work with, sometimes I work with text, as I mentioned earlier. But when you work with text and you do a photo transfer, you want to make it sure that it's in reverse when you put it on the surface, because then when you remove the paper, the print should still be onto the surface, and then it will read properly. Otherwise, it won't really work. So I'm going to move the camera a little bit. What I do with the tissue paper sometimes is I also cut circles out of them, squares, that kind of thing. And that creates this incidental kind of process. So the first thing I will do is I'm going to do a tissue paper process on this. To apply the tissue paper, I work with gel medium. This is a gel medium acrylic polymer, very thick. I like the thicker side. You can use gloss or matte. It doesn't really matter. I'm just going to move the camera a little bit so you can see what I'm doing. Okay, so what I want to do is create with the tissue paper this kind of layering, this architectural space, and that way you can get this kind of incidental effect of the abstraction, right? So you just want to layer it on to the surface. And one of the tricks of doing this type of process is that you don't want to overdo and squish the tissue paper too much. Tissue paper has almost a watercolor effect. It can layer color on top of other colors. So when you work, say, with blue and yellow, you can then get a greenish tone. So you mix in colors using the different types of papers. And we will just layer on one step at another after another. You layer on the tissue paper, then you do another coat of gel medium on top of that. And if you have everything already done before, then it's pretty simple and you just have to kind of go one into the other. But you want to make sure it's sandwiched between the gel medium. Yeah, at this stage of the process, I actually don't think too much about it. I just know that I want to have a particular color palette. And once the color palette is in there, then I can either respect that as the painting progresses, or I can eliminate it. Sometimes what happens is there's just all the same type of coloring. So then I have to change the color a little bit. Everything starts to turn out yellow or blue or whatever, and that's just not good. So once the tissue paper is done, you want to layer it all on there. You want to make sure that all the pieces are got the tissue paper, got the gel medium underneath it. I work with the razors, and I will cut then the edges of the tissue paper off, or pull it off if it's easy. So here you have basically the basic kind of premise of an abstraction that starts. Now, the thing about tissue paper is that it looks like this when it's with gel medium, but then it dries. And when it dries, the colors become much more enhanced. So you see a little bit how it works from behind. You see how the colors are a little bit more intense, and the abstraction and the contrast a little bit more intense. The next process I'm going to do is, so here I just want to show you this. This is with the music on the top. So if you think about creating the story and then doing the music, and then it sets the context for the piece. Now, when we do the actual gel transfer, you want to think about the size and scale of the piece or the image. This one you can see there's postcards and the vintage wallpapers, that kind of thing. And then when we do the photo transfer, this is from an old vintage postcard, which I then reconfigured through Photoshop, enlarged it, printed it off, but you can get this kind of sense, and then cut out more of the darker pieces. Before I applied it, you might want to see how I did the white process here, and that then gives me more of a contrast for the let me see. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to do a photo transfer of this particular image onto here, and I first layer on the gel medium. This is gel medium. First layer on the gel medium on here, and then I put gel medium on the image. If you have questions and things like that, just post them, but I'll follow up with the questions afterwards when they go onto Facebook, and I'll answer that kind of thing. So you can also send me an email at marjolin@marjolin.com if you have a question as well. So I just layer on the gel medium, and then I'm going to put it onto the piece. So here we have the piece here. And we're just going to push it on there. Now, part of the issue about gel medium is that what it can do is that it can stop from you being able to rub off the paper. The goal of this is to put it on and then rub off the paper once it's dry, and then the image is on the surface. So you want to be able to do as flat as possible and rub it so that all the bubbles are off and the image is as flat as it can be on the surface. So you'll see it's on there. Now what we're going to do is we're going to remove an image now. And here we have a round piece that I'm doing of a girl by the pool. This will be available in December at a show. So what I'm going to do is remove the paper of that. So in order to remove the paper, I wet the piece. And when I wet it, the water soaks in through the paper, and then it's easier to rub off. Now what you might see is there's parts where the water has not gone into there. So at that point, I use the razor and I cut through the acrylic or the gel medium that's on the top. And this way, the water goes into it, and then I'm able to remove the paper easily, a little bit more easier. So when I remove the paper, I work with something, it's a sponge sander. And when I do a photo transfer, I usually do the one image and then I let it sit for a day so that it's really, really dry and the ink has absorbed into the collage underneath. I find that what happens is that the collage, because it's working with gel medium and tissue paper, it can rub off if you take off the image too quickly. So you want to give it time to dry. And then as you rub off the paper, the ink and the outlaying or the layout of it will come out and will be apparent. Once that is done, then you can have some fun and you can work with paint, or I work with markers, something that brings out color, and you can really start to work on the piece. But this lays out the actual image to begin with. So it becomes a little bit easier to transfer an image of someone that you want to highlight and give a piece to. So there's a couple layers of paper with this, but you can basically see a little bit how the image of a woman lying on a lawn chair reading, which is the good parts in life, right? You can spray it a little bit more with water, rub it with your fingers, and slowly the image will start to appear. Now, what you will see, of course, is that sometimes the image doesn't come fully through or it's completely rubbed off, at which point you have to use your artistic talents and start to build up the image a little bit more. So once this is done, I usually work with paint and then markers. And I work with all different kinds of markers, acrylic markers, oil markers, things that create a really fine line. So those are really easy to find at the art supply store. And then acrylic as well. So once you have that done, then you can add other photo transfer on there. You can work with text. You can create stenciling on there and create different patterns on there. So each process and each step creates a little bit more of an interest to the piece. So this piece will be released in December at a show, and I'll let you know about that if you subscribe to my email list. So now what we're going to do is talk a little bit about the work that is available as part of my sale of small art and prints on the good parts of life. I'm going to talk a little bit about some pieces that are highlighted. This piece is called Time to Relax. It's 16 by 16. And as you can see, if you look a little bit close, there's vintage postcards that are underneath it. And then the image is layered with tissue paper and then acrylic paint. But it's part of this year I started with Postcards from Paradise series, which were started with vintage postcards. And it's all about trying to find that little place of heaven, right, that we're looking for. In today, I think it's pretty relevant. So because art enables us to escape. And so that's what this work is really about. And so I love this piece. She's sitting, having a drink, having a cocktail, sitting by the pool. And there's really nothing better than that. The other part of the other series that developed this year was being at home. So being at home and being quarantined has created this whole baking and cooking, at least in my home it has. And so this piece is called Happy. And it started with a vintage ad. And you can see the tissue paper, but you can see underneath is a fabric pattern, which lends itself to domestic, that kind of thing. And then on the side, it has the word happy, which is the name of the piece. Underneath is vintage wallpaper as well. You know, it's baking a cake and it's just focusing on the good things, on the essence of things. And really, this is what we've become, right? It's becoming the essential of who we are at home. We can't spend a lot of time sharing with other people or traveling or going out. So we make our life as good as possible at home. And this celebrates that. So then the other series, which I really work on quite a bit, is being inspired by movies and classic films. And this is inspired by Breakfast at Tiffany's and Audrey Hepburn. You can see an image right here, which is actually an image that I take from the film. and work that into the collage first and then work with Audrey in there. So this piece is also part of the sale. Now just remember, everything's 30% off. So this piece regularly is $425. So you'll save yourself over $100 if you buy this piece, which is pretty awesome. So the also big piece of this is that I do prints. Most of the pieces that are behind me are available as prints. And to give you an idea of what a print looks like on canvas, this piece is done on canvas with a black border. This is a 12 by 12, and that can be ordered online on my print store. It can be also ordered as paper. So this is on a fine art paper, archival paper. This is 16 by 16. And then finally, you can also order them on metal. So usually what you can do in ordering online for me is that you have to order them as a frame, because I like to keep the corners protected because they can get damaged quite a bit. So that's part. But with 30% off, it makes it quite affordable. And finally, we've got pillows and scarves. So as I showed before, this is kind of a velour pillow that's inspired by patterns of what I work with. And you can get different really lovely patterns that can be used. There are scarves, poly chiffon scarves, which are also inspired by this series, Empowered Women series, and they're fabulous. And my mom wears hers all the time, so it's great. It's a great little gift. And these are regularly $75, but with 30% off, they come to about $50. Okay. So if you have any questions or input, send me a note, and then I will be in touch. So be sure to go on my sale. It's there till midnight on Monday, and use the word joy as a discount code, because we have to look to the good parts in life. Thanks for joining me.